Final Fantasy is a name that nearly everyone has heard. Gamers and non-gamers alike know what Final Fantasy is, and it continues to be one of the highest-selling video game series all over the world, and one of the most prolific, with 13 main entries into the series, as well as various spin-offs and related products. There have also been 2 films made, piles of books and comics, and products ranging from jewelry to chocobo plushies. The success of the series has led to Squaresoft becoming one of the leading names in RPGs. In 2003, Square was purchased by their main competitor, Enix, creating Square Enix, a juggernaut of game development that releases some of the highest-selling games of all time. It may be hard to believe these days, but there was a time when Square was not known for RPGs, and the original Final Fantasy was a second attempt at a failed epic, and at the time of its release, the company was nearly bankrupt. The Square Company, usually referred to as Squaresoft, started in 1983, and their first game was The Death Trap, an interactive fiction game for Japanese PCs. After that, they created an eclectic mix of games, such as Thexter, Cruise Chaser Blasty, and Alpha. Their first game to be released in the United States was King's Knight, an action game for the NES. Although their games were of undeniable quality, they usually sold rather poorly, with their most well-known game being Rad Racer on the NES. While they released mostly action-oriented titles, a slant towards fantasy stylings could be seen early on with games such as King's Knight, and with the success of the Dragon Quest series in Japan, Square opted to create their own epic RPG, a vast adventure for the Famicom Disk System that would span 5 discs. Its title was Holy Sword Legend: The Emergence of Excalibur. The game was ambitious in scope, to the point where it eventually proved to be impossible to finish. The time and money spent on the project was vast, and when it was killed off in 1987, the company was nearly bankrupt. Rather than quit, the company decided to give it one more try, an all-or-nothing salvo on the Famicom, in cartridge form. The lessons learned during the development of Holy Sword Legend led to the creation of a much simpler game, which could be released in cartridge format rather than 5 floppy disks. The game's director, Hironobu Sakaguchi, gave it the name Final Fantasy as an example of dark humor, believing that his final game would be a fantasy game. Final Fantasy was released to huge success, both critically and commercially, and is today considered to be one of the most influential NES games ever released. The game's plot has 4 warriors, named by the player, who embark on a journey to restore 4 darkened crystals to grace. The crystals represent the elements, earth, fire, water, and air, a popular theme in Japanese RPGs. The light warriors' opposites were the antagonists, the 4 fiends: Lich, Marilith, Kraken, and Tiamat. 4 boss characters the player would have to discover and defeat, and it all led to an endgame where the player would travel through time to defeat the head fiend, Chaos. The gameplay was simple, with players fighting random battles with enemies to gain experience to grow stronger, and gold to purchase items and better equipment. You could also talk to various non-player characters to gather clues and gain information on the quest. The 4 characters themselves were purposely left as blank slates, with the player character choosing each member's name and job, allowing their imagination to fill in the blanks. Players could choose any combination of 3 fighting classes: the fighter, the monk, and the thief, and 3 magic classes: the red mage, white mage, and black mage. This led to the game having unprecedented replay value for an RPG, as there were hundreds of combinations to try out. Some, like the infamous party of 4 white mages, made the game unusually difficult, letting gamers who had mastered Final Fantasy to try out a new challenge. The game was also released in the United States on the NES, where it shared a more modest success, as American gamers were less prone to buy RPGs than Japanese gamers were, though this would eventually change. Though Square would occasionally release games of other styles, they henceforth became known primarily as a creator of RPGs. Because of the situation in the company when Final Fantasy was created, it was believed that there would not be a sequel, so Final Fantasy's ending has a note of finality to it. After the success of the game, however, it was clear that a sequel would be inevitable. Because of the closed nature of Final Fantasy II was created using none of the characters or settings from the original game, something that would become a staple of the series, with each game containing a fully completed story. It was years before any direct sequels were released to a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy II did reuse a lot of the graphics from the first game, most specifically character sprites and map terrain, but the game was drastically different. Gone were the choice of character jobs and names, instead replaced by a set party of 4 characters with their own distinct names and appearances: Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon. Leon would wind up leaving the party very early on and not rejoining until near the end of the game, leaving the 4th spot open for a rotating cast of characters that would join and leave throughout the game, some of them even getting killed off. Gone also were experience points and levels, instead replaced by a system where any character could equip any weapon, armor, or spell and level them up through constant use, allowing players to create their own custom jobs. For example, when I play the game, I usually have Firion using swords and white magic, Maria using bows and black magic, Guy using axes and white magic, and Leon using spears and no magic. Aside from leveling skills through constant use, other character stats would be leveled by the character taking damage or being targeted by spells, leading many gamers to spend the first half of the game beating on their own characters to quickly become powerful.